I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today's episode, we're going to talk about just how athletic this year's offensive tackle class is and how that impacts the Steelers draft plans. That and more speculation into the Diontae Johnson trade possibility and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet. That's $150. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, everybody. So again, we're going to keep kind of going back to the combine, focusing on some things. And I've been had a chance to look over numbers and compare and contrast. And I wanted to talk about this offensive tackle class. We talked about receivers. We'll talk about corners a little bit more soon, but I really think this tackle class is extremely impressive. And part of that goes into how they tested at the combine. Now, if you're looking at this, there's several things that line up here. One, this year's offensive tackle class has a lot of guys, a lot of prospects who show good to great tape, and a lot of those guys are also top-end athletes. That's a really good thing to have this year when the Steelers still need to address offensive tackle because they don't want to go into 2024 with Dan Moore as just the only option next to Broderick Jones. They want to go get a rookie who could come in and do that. And fortunately, I think the Steelers will be in a good shot to get one of the guys who both tested well and showed good tape in their collegiate career. And we'll get into some of those guys specifically soon. I think it's important to know in every draft class, there are guys who are great athletes and there are guys who have good tape, but there's a lot of times that those things don't line up. You'll see guys that have just awesome tape, but they don't have the measurables. They're too short here. They're not fast enough if they're the corner that you really liked. There's a lot of things like that. Then there's guys that have all the measurables, but don't have the tape. And then you're like, well, they translate. I don't know. Were they just a workout warrior? Things like that happen. But when you get the mix of both, that's a really good thing to have there. And I think that's what the Steelers could end up having if they go get one of these top offensive tackles in the first round, maybe even in the second round if certain guys stick around and aren't picked up so early. So when you get that high-end prospect with the measurables, you can score really big. And that's why the more I look at the possibilities of what the Steelers could do in the first round, I keep coming back to offensive tackle as one of those possibilities. It's a position of need. It could be something that sets the Steelers up for a long time. It could help, finalize the offensive line and what they want to be moving forward. And this is a great class to do that with. So let's take a look at some of the numbers that we've seen. Last year, when the Steelers drafted Broderick Jones, the thing that we predicted on the show and the thing that I said, hey, I think this is really going to work. He was one of the top end offensive tackles in both tape and in the metrics of his measurables and things like that. And we know this because we go back and we look at what's called his relative athletic score. Now, you can look at the combine numbers raw if you want to, and there's nothing bad with that. But I really appreciate Kent Lee Platt, a guy who has done this for years now, the relative athletic score. Basically, it takes each event and compares it against all the other, like each event, like the 40-yard dash, the bench press, the shuttles, and all that, and it compares one player's score to every other player's score that's of that same position in a draft class or even all time, and then it turns it into like a 1-to-10 ratio where the higher your score is, the higher percentile you were in, or the better percentile you were in as far as your overall performance. So like if you're in the 9s, you're a top end athlete in your draft class. Like it's just straight up that. And if you go back to Broderick Jones, he was a 9.57, which was very, very good. It was fifth best among offensive tackles who had relative athletic scores in last year's draft. And again, what made it extra rare for Broderick Jones because some of those guys ahead of him, like Jake Witt and Trevor Reed, they weren't first round picks. No one was thinking about those guys as first round picks. Blake Freeland was another one from BYU. He's a draft pick, but not one of the people think at the top of the list. Darnell Wright was one of those draft picks. So you had two guys in the 9.5 or higher range last year that were top end picks. And that was pretty good. And the Steelers got one of them. That's why I thought that they would do what they could to get him. And I think they did a good job. So that's that. Now, again, you can go back and get another guy like that. And here's the thing. So Darnell Wright, his relative athletic score is 9.68. That was third best in his class, but that was clearly like the best score of the guys who they knew would be offensive top first round top end offensive tackles. The other guys didn't have the kind of tape that he had and the reputation that he had. You look at that, there are five offensive tackles in this class this year that have a higher relative athletic score that Darnell Wright did last year. And three of those higher guys are guys being talked about in the first round. Now, one's an obvious one. Joe Alt, he's going top 10, maybe top 5. Who knows? Like he's there's no way he's coming down to the Steelers, but he's a freak of nature, and that's why Joe Alt is that guy. Now, the other guy here that you could also look at that fits that is Patrick Paul. He out of Houston, he had a 9.8 relative athletic score. That was really impressive. And Taliese Fuaga was another one that had it. So, and he had a 9.71, even though it's beneath Wright's score. It's still an awesome one. And there's also Amarius Mims who had a 9.5. Other top scorers also included Olu Fashanu from Penn State, 9.44. Troy Fatano of Washington, 9.4. Kingsley Suamataya of, I think, BYU, 9.35. And then Jordan Moses, 8.99. And Jordan Moses, 8.99 is still very good. Like that's still upper tier. And that's a lot of options to have at tackle. And some of those other guys, like I think like Asua Mataya and Moses, they're going to be like, if you miss the boat, you go back and get those guys later. But we're talking about some of the names that I mentioned. Joe Alt's going to go early. Fashano's going to go early. But we're talking about Mims. We're talking about Fatano, Suatamaya, Taliese Fuaga. All those guys are very recent. And you know what? I missed one. Tyler Guyton, another one. So that's another guy. You need a 9.63. There are just lots of athletic tackles in this class. And again, a lot of these guys, these aren't just guys that are just like lower level colleges that just tested really well. These are guys with talent that are like they can make a difference in the NFL. And not all of them are going to go in the first round. But that's another good sign that the Steelers could have their pick of a really good tackle at 20. And over time, we'll do a deeper film dive to accompany some of these numbers and try to, bring more context. Like say, hey, we saw this guy's broad jump was really good, and we could see that with this tape on the field. That's something we'll eventually get to and we'll talk about on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But point is, this is a very, very athletic and talented offensive tackle class, and the Steelers need an offensive tackle. It would make a lot of sense to go get that guy in the first round. I know Zach Frazier, Jax Powers-Johnson, the Steelers want to get their center of the future, and they've missed on this a few times now. But I think that offensive tackle, with the way that things add up here, unless there's some drastic changes, it makes a lot of sense to go that route. But we will keep an eye on that moving forward. I'm doing more studying, and as I do more studying and find more things, and I start to develop my big board a little bit better, we'll get to more into specifics of player versus player and why one player's more valued than the other. We'll get to that in a bit. But we also have talked about Diontae Johnson, because I keep getting asked the questions about, is he getting traded? We're hearing all the speculation. It's just speculation, but I'll tell you why maybe you should be paying attention there a little bit closer. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Maybe you'd go for a run, read a book, or just be there for a friend. But what if you were there for yourself? That's where therapy can come in and help, because therapy can help you find what matters the most to you and how you can do more of it. I've benefited from help of a good therapist in my life who's helped me sort out some of the more important things that I try to balance out every single day and come at it from a more level-headed approach. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. If you just want to make a change, BetterHelp will help with that. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussions here on our Tuesday episode. Now, let's take a step back and let's go look at something else. We're going to take a step back away from the combine and kind of talk a little bit about something that's been floating around. Now, I want to preface all of this discussion to say that no, I'm not reporting sources that say that anyone that's called Diontae Johnson or that Diontae Johnson has called anybody. But we have started to see more and more of the rumors not even rumors, speculation that it would make sense for the Steelers to part way with Diontae Johnson, send him to a team that would give up a draft pick or something for him, and that could work out for the Steelers. That's, again, it's all speculation. There's nothing behind this. There's nothing behind this that's like, this is definitely going to happen. But I've been saying for a minute now, if you've been listening to the show the past month or so, I brought this up multiple times as a potential thing that could happen, just because I don't think they're going to pay him and Pickens for the same deal. So Diontae Johnson, I also think there's going to be a market for him if the Steelers are shopping him. People aren't dumb. They see what Johnson can do, and they recognize that basically he only had half a season of good Ben Roethlisberger in 2020 before things started to fall apart. And that was, I think his best year statistically. But point being, Diontae Johnson, I think a lot of NFL teams and GMs and everyone out there, they all kind of see, hey, like, he has not had the best situation in Pittsburgh. It's been rough. He got in 2019 when Devlin Hodges and Mason Rudolph were the quarterbacks. Then it was Ben for half a year, which was fine. Then at the end of the year, bottom out. Old man Ben after that. Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett. It's just guy after guy after guy after guy after guy. It's a lot there that he's had to deal with. So I can see other NFL teams being like, hey, I could make Diontae Johnson the superstar of the NFL. So with the top tier QB, would Johnson get like over 1,500 yards and several touchdowns? Maybe that could be worth something substantial to a team that's trying to push for a Super Bowl right now, like the Bills, like the Chiefs. The Chiefs won it, but hey, they might take another one. But like the Bills, the Chiefs, the Cowboys, the Lions, the Packers, even the Texans could be in play there. And I think that's where it could get really interesting to see what happens with Diontae Johnson, because this whole trade speculation thing, there's a lot of different ways this can go. They could keep him on the roster for another year because you want to keep him on the roster, and then you could say, hey, we'll get a third round comp pick at the end of next year when we don't re-sign him, or you could look into trying to figure out a way out of that. You can say, hey, what if we traded? What if we traded him away? What if we got a second or a third round pick? I feel like a third round pick's a lot more likely. But who knows? They got a second for Chase Claypool, which still don't know how that happened. But back to my point here was, you could also package Diontae Johnson maybe for another player that you think would be a good fit. So the other part of this, and I just had a thought there. There's talk about the Chiefs wanting to trade Snead if there's negotiations that don't work. And Snead and Johnson, ooh, there's something there, y'all. But let's talk about Johnson specifically. That was just something I was pondering there, and literally just came across my brain as I was talking about this show. So, bottom line, I just don't think the Steelers are keeping Johnson. Again, that just makes a lot of sense for what they're doing. But the other part of that is what could very happen on draft, that this trade might not happen for a while. It might even just happen on draft day, because the Steelers, they can drive up this price. Like there's going to be someone that gets desperate and it's like, oh, I need that guy, and they'll want to go get they'll want to go get their receiver because he's just a talented veteran, and they're like, man, that could be the final piece. Diontae Johnson could solve all the problems. I get that. But I think the Steelers could exhibit some patience here. So I know some people don't like Diontae Johnson. They say he's a bum. They say all this stuff. He's not. He's a very talented receiver. A lot of people make fun of him because he used to drop passes. He only dropped 2 passes this year, by the way, people. So relax. But I get the sentiment of like, hey, moving on, find other answers. But Diontae Johnson, if you can get a draft day pick for him, and you could make this trade on draft day, kind of ramp up the pressure, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, to add up here and to do that. And some people are going to say, well, who would trade for a receiver on draft day when there's all these great wide receivers? Well, I don't know. Tell the New England Patriots when they traded for Randy Moss on a draft day, or tell the Philadelphia Eagles when they traded the Tennessee Titans to get AJ Brown. So personally, I just think that the Steelers still want to be in a position where they can where they can be balanced as a roster going into the drafts. There's not any immediate needs, but I also think that they're still trying to figure things out as far as what values they can get for free agency and draft additions before they commit to letting something go that's strong for them. And that's Diontae Johnson. I mean, Diontae, again, when you look at what he does and his ability to separate, his ability to create, he's one of the tougher guys to cover in the NFL. Excuse me, I'm sipping on some coffee. But I also think that there's a way to handle this to kind of prepare yourself for this so that whichever direction it goes, the Steelers are in a good spot. Because you can say, all right, no one was taking the Diontae Johnson trade, efforts there. We'll bring him back. We'll have George Pickens. You'll have Calvin Austin, and who knows, you'll have like a Roman Wilson or type of guy there. And then that's a talented receiving room. And that's where I think that it would make a lot of sense right now if whether the Steelers trade Diontae Johnson or not, but sign one in free agency, Tyler Boyd. But sign one in free agency, prepare yourself to be able to draft one, and then that way, think of this. You'd have the option of going into that draft day with George Pickens, Diontae Johnson, potential draft pick coming in. Like there's a lot of things that add up to this. And then if you trade away Diontae Johnson, you could be in a position to handle it because maybe you've signed a Tyler Boyd. Maybe you drafted a guy. So then you brought in two new wide receivers to your room to make up for the loss of your best route runner. I think things add up there. And again, I want to restate this. I am not saying this is going to happen. I'm not saying that I'm not saying I have a source that says it's going to happen. I'm just telling you a lot of these things add up to what could work out for the Steelers' favor there. So just me, I think that the Steelers are in a position where they could do very well with waiting around on draft day. They could wait to see what happens with Diontae Johnson. And I also think that there's definitely a chance that they could kind of double dip at wide receiver this year, and get one in free agency and get one in the draft, because I think that's also something important to do when you have a really great wide receiver class, which they do. This is a great year for wide receiver, cornerback, offensive tackle, 3 positions in need. What do you look at that? But again, I think it just makes sense to talk about this because it is circulating a little bit more. People are popularizing it, but it's not a definitive thing yet. We haven't seen anything that definitely says, oh yeah, Diontae Johnson is definitely gone. But there's breadcrumbs, and they're making a lot of sense. And again, if the Steelers, if it doesn't work out, okay, you add a free agent, draft a wide receiver, bing, bang, boom, you good to go. But let's talk about some of those other options, because I also think it's interesting, the idea, we talk about, how are they going to address this position in the draft, or how are they going to address this position in free agency? What if we look at some positions that could realistically be supported by both this season? We'll talk about that on the other side of the break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, stick with us. As always, this show is also brought to you by FanDuel. There's always great chances to win on FanDuel, America's number 1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. If you're like me, new football season being done doesn't mean I'm done with sports. FanDuel gives you so many ways to win: NBA, NHL, college basketball, and so much more action available to you. FanDuel has so many ways for you to keep moving forward and find big ways to win. You can make quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive prop bets, and so many more options. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We keep it rolling here. Let's get back into this topic that I was starting to delve into with the Diontae Johnson trade talk, because I do think wide receiver makes a lot of sense. Sign a veteran, not an expensive one, Tyler Boyd-ish, ain't gonna cost you that much. Planning to draft a guy, and then go into draft day with, like, hey, you got Pickens, Johnson, and random veteran that you signed, and maybe you can say, like, okay, we like this group, but we want to add another different piece there. I could see something happening like that. I could see the Steelers saying, like, hey, they're building this. They're building with an older guy and a younger guy, adding it into the Steelers wide receiver room. But then it begs the question: what other positions could be helpful, or would it be helpful, or even necessary to improve? As far as trying to get both players in free agency and the draft, because that doesn't always happen. That's where, again, wide receiver makes a lot of sense. Veteran can stabilize the room. Draft pick can be part of the future. Bring on a playmaker that doesn't cost you a lot of cap space. There's a lot of things that add up about wide receiver. But what are other positions that you could be looking at there? Cornerback is, I think, at the top of my list. There's others that make sense. I don't expect them to keep Patrick Peterson on a $9.7 million cap hit. That's a lot of money. Levi Wallace is gone. Shannon Sullivan's gone. You're going to need 3 corners. So you're going to have to draft one at some point. You might have to draft 2, one of them being, not one of the, one of those lower level corners, not going to be guys you guys would depend on right away. But I think you're going to draft a corner this year. I think you're going to sign a corner this year because, as we said, they're going to have space for that. And finding one that's good in free agency could buy you time, because we know the Steelers, even with Joey Porter Jr. and Broderick Jones and the way they started, took some time to get there. And the Steelers don't want to be caught without an answer at a key position or at any position if they don't have to be. But again, if you're looking at corner, think of it this way. This could be the potential future of the Steelers if they're looking at the cornerback position and where they could double down both in getting a veteran and maybe even multiple rookies in this draft class. You might not need to get a big splash at cornerback, like a Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed. You can get just a solid starter, Chidobe Awuzie, from the Bengals, something like that. And then you could have Porter as your CB1, and then you can have at it with the rest of it. Corey Trice could be back and healthy, and he could be looking good. Darius Rush could have a full year with the same team. All of a sudden, there's options at corner, which it doesn't always look that way for the Steelers. But there are answers there that could work out in the Steelers' favor if they were to need cornerback and find answers sooner rather than later in that department. But again, I think this has the makings to be a really great draft class across the board when it comes to setting yourself up with multiple positions. I also think safety is another spot where they could bring in new guys to kind of fix things out there at the safety position. And again, do it with free agency and the draft. I think they can withstand it. I think the Steelers are in a spot where they have a lot of different options in front of them that's going to make it hard for them to be predictable to see where they're going. And I think that's where, unless you're reading the tea leaves, but like to the average layman who just looks at box scores or standings and things like that, I think they're going to miss out on some of the things that the Steelers do well. And I also think this is a chance for the front office to flex a little bit. Last year, all the flexing, Omar Khan, Eddie Weidl, they knocked it out of the park. Might have had the best draft class of the draft. Maybe not. I think you can go over the Texans, certainly CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. So maybe I'll take that back. That's probably the best draft class. But they had a really doggone good one. They hit on so many picks. If they can hit again, that could be hey, this is our core for a while. That could be an answer there. But again, let's see how the Steelers front office handles cornerback, wide receiver, offense. I think offensive tackle, they're just drafting one. I think that they have their swing tackle and Dan Moore this year. They don't need to invest more than that. But wide receiver, cornerback, safety, all three of those, in my opinion, they could be very much on the in the consideration in both situations. But again, it's part of what I think the Steelers can do this season. I think they're in a position where they have assets to spend in free agency. They have draft picks. They're in a decent spot. But it'll all depend about how they handle it and how Omar Khan handles it moving forward with what the Steelers front office is trying to do. We'll have more on them as the week goes along. Hope you enjoyed the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday. Talk about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.